Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of my Bigfoot sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
My Bigfoot sighting took place in 2008. I was 10 years old. It was my first time out hunting in regular deer season. I was with my dad, and we went out trying to get the first deer of our family for the year. It was about 5 o'clock in the morning when we woke up, and we had a place that we were going to go to. We had set up a deer stand looking out over a field, and we were planning on getting there about an hour before sunrise, but we got a little bit of a late start getting out there. Going back, nothing out of the usual. I had spent 10 years of my life there. My dad had spent probably about 35 of his life in these woods. When we were getting back to the deer stand, we were walking back. It was a nice, clear morning, night, whatever you would want to call it. And it was a little less than a full moon, not quite a full moon. But you could see pretty crisply as long as the clouds weren't going over the moon. We get back to the deer stand, and it's still about 20 minutes before what we call first light. It's a little bit before sunrise, probably about 15 minutes. But first light is when you stop getting light from the moon and you start getting the yellow light from the sun coming up over the horizons. You still don't have shadows. It seems like everything is still in shadow because the sun's not up over the horizon. It's just the light coming around the horizon. And we're in a pretty small field, so most of the time the shadows don't exist. Unless the sun is pretty much straight up and down, you're not going to get shadows cast across the field. And we're back there a little bit early than what we usually see. We usually see deer there about daylight, probably the next 30 minutes thereafter. But we can't shoot really until daylight. It's not the law, but it's what I was taught growing up as being an ethical hunter, is you don't shoot unless you have 100% certainty that you can hit your target and that you can see your target clearly. And until daylight breaks over the trees, you really don't get that. So my dad settles in. He has a nice comfy chair. I have a little fold-out chair that you take on camping trips. So he sits back and he says he's going to take a little bit of a nap. So I'm out there. I'm the only one awake. And he's a pretty heavy sleeper. It takes a little bit more than just a shake to get him up. But about 5 minutes before what I would call sunrise, I start seeing some movement in the trees. I'm out here deer hunting. I think it's a deer. So I pull up my gun, I get it ready, and I notice that it's slightly humanoid. And we're talking, it's walking out of the trees about 100 yards away from me. Maybe a little less than that, maybe a little bit more. But 100 yards is about the key there. And I think it's probably my cousin. He likes to dress up elaborately during the first week of hunting season. And he hunts not too far from me, but I thought it was weird that he would be walking across the field here because it's about a 5-minute walk out of his way to walk through my field. And it walks out of the woods and starts crossing the field a little bit. And about the time it gets to the fenced-in field, we have a 3-layer barbed wire fence cutting off a part of the field in our food plot. and he walks right up to that and puts his hand on the top layer. This top layer is about 4 feet off the ground, 3 3/4, 4 feet off the ground. So it's enough to where for any standard sized human, and any human that I knew at the time, to get over that fence over the top rung, you're going to have to push that down, kind of hike over the top of it, high center yourself, hike your other leg over the other side. It's not an easy task. My dad was 6'2" at the time. I've been to the field since then, and I'm 6 foot. And for me to go over the top rung, it takes quite a bit of effort. Anyone under 6 foot tall is probably going to have to go between the second and third ring. This thing that I saw walks up to it, and he puts his hand down on it. And about that time, I realized that that's below his waistline. So this fence is about 4 foot tall, and this thing that I'm seeing is probably 8 foot tall. And that's when I realized it's not a human. It's not any human that I know. It's not human. So I pull my sights up. I want to get a nice, good look at this thing. But like I said, it's still not fully light time yet. It's still light peeking over the top of the trees. Everything looks like a shadow. So I pull up my scope, and I look through the scope, and I'm on a 4 times zoom. So 100 yards looks like 25 yards away. And when I look at it, I can't really see much definition to things, but I can see that it is a mostly hairy animal, head to toe, and it's walking across from me, so I don't get a good look at what the face structure is, but I know that it's not human. It doesn't have a super protruding nose. If you get a side profile of a human, you get the nose that sticks out forward, but it was kind of a shorter nose. The chin was out. The chin and mouth were out a little bit farther than what you would expect. And the fur, I mean, I didn't get a good look at it. I couldn't tell you what the color was, but it wasn't just hair stubble. It wasn't, like a shortcut hairdo over the body. It was probably a couple inches long. And it had a nice deep chest, not broad, because I'm not getting a frontal of it. I'm getting a side view. And its chest is bodybuilder thick. And I don't know any bodybuilders at the time, so I'm just in awe. And the entire time, my dad's just sleeping through it. I'm looking at this thing, and as it steps over the fence, it takes absolutely zero effort to do so. It steps over the fence, just one leg over the top, hand on the rail, I guess not to cut itself, and it just kind of steps over it. It doesn't like hike over, go sideways to step over it and push it down. It just steps over it kind of casually, like you're stepping over something that's about 2 foot off the ground. You just like pick your foot up real high, stick it over the top, and then your back leg kind of follows up in an arc pattern. And at that point, I realize what I'm looking at. 8 foot tall, humanoid looking, hairy, and it's a Bigfoot. And as soon as I realize this, I start hitting my dad on the leg. And, it's taking him a little bit to get up. So I look away, and I'm hitting him on the leg, and he's stirring up. And I look up just in time to see him walk into the woods. And there's a little clearing that a bunch of animals use to go through, so that I know exactly where he walks out. I have seen animals since then and before then walking in and out of that little clearing. It's the only spot in that corner that an animal of any decent size can go in and out. So I know exactly where he goes into the woods. And I tell myself, I'm like, okay, after we get done hunting here today, I'm going to go see how tall it was, because he had to kind of duck his head. He didn't have to like crouch down, but he just had to tilt his head down to make sure he cleared under a branch. And my dad finally wakes up, and I tell him, I whisper in his ear, because, you know, we're still out deer hunting. Deer can come at any time. I'm like, Dad, I think I just saw a Bigfoot. And he kind of gets a chuckle out of it. He thinks I'm joking. And the reason he thinks I'm joking is because my middle brother, he's older than me, he had went a couple years before. And he said he saw a bear. We haven't had bear where I was hunting since my dad was growing up. He had never seen a bear there. And my brother, at the time, he was about 12. He said that he had saw a bear, and, you know, my dad kind of laughed. He thinks that we have overactive imaginations. So he's like, all right, you know, we probably have an explanation here. We'll talk about it when we get home. And we go through the rest of the hunting trip. We don't see anything that day. And I tell him as we're leaving, it's about 2:00 in the afternoon, because I'm a kid. I can't stay there all day. It's about 2:00 in the afternoon, and I want to go look at the field. And he's like, why do you want to go look at the field? I'm like, I saw where this Bigfoot walked in. I wanted to, like, get a good gauge of how tall it was. And, you know, he's a good dad. He likes making sure that we have fun, active imagination. So he lets me. I mean, it's only like 4 minutes out of his way to let me go down, check it out, and come back. So I go down there, and the clearing is taller than I was with my hands up. So, and I've been back there since then. It's grown over a little bit, but I can kind of tell where it was, and it's still taller than me by 1.5 feet, 2 foot. So this thing, if it would have walked through the clearing head up, would have been at least 7.5 feet tall. But with him decking his head down, I would say he probably just cleared the 8-foot mark. We're talking 8'2", 8'3", probably. And on the way back, you know, nothing's out of the ordinary. It's only like a 5-minute walk to where we parked, and then another like 2-minute drive back to our house. We don't hunt very far from our house. And I get back, and I start telling my dad, I'm like, hey, this is what happened. He's like, he believes in Bigfoot. He wants to believe me, but I'm also a 10-year-old boy, give or take. And he's listening to me. He's not really casting me aside, being like, yeah, that's not what happened. I can tell he doesn't believe me, but he believes that I may have saw what I saw. And since then, I've been an avid believer. I didn't believe really until I saw that. So I go into explaining to him everything that was happening. And he goes, all right, well, how did it walk? And, you know, when I was watching it, I really wasn't paying attention. So I'm racking my brain. And how it walked might have been what I was tipping myself off with it not being human, other than it being 8 foot tall. Because when it walked, you know, humans have a bend at the elbow walk when you're moving your hands. And this thing really didn't. It seemed to like sway it at the shoulder more than at the elbow. And it took me until years later, I guess, watching the famous Bigfoot video, the Patterson-Gimlin film. And that's how it walks. And it wasn't really until I saw that film that I knew what I had saw. When you watch that film, you see that deep barrel chest. You see the swinging of the arms rather than the bending of the elbows. And I just knew that when I saw that and I recalled the memories in my head, I was like, that is just what it had to be. And all these years, my dad has been telling me, oh, no, it was your cousin Keith. You know, he likes to dress up. He probably dressed up as like an Indian in a headdress or something. And that's why it was so tall. And I had to tell him, no, like he stepped over the fence. He goes, well, people can step over that fence. You see me do it all the time. And I have to explain to him like that it didn't like hike over the fence. It just stepped over the fence. And I don't know if to this day, if he believes me or not, but this is why I love going out into the woods. That exhilaration I haven't felt since. I haven't seen anything like it since. And I would say that all that this has done really has made me appreciate being out in the woods more. I know there are a lot of people that say, like, oh, if science hasn't explained it, then it doesn't exist. But you have to believe what you see, and I believe in what I saw. I haven't had any nightmares or anything about it. I get looks from my friends the first time I tell them that I've seen a Bigfoot, but, you know, in today's time, I think people are more accepting of it. And I think if it were to happen today, I think my dad would have believed me. But I think back then he was a believer, but he didn't believe it could happen anywhere near us. So I guess in short, I'm saying I respect these animals, people, whatever you want to call them. I didn't see any super intelligence in that animal that day. It was looking just like a regular animal. So I call him an animal, but I see other people calling them, you know, referring to them kind of like people, like just a different species of sentient, sapient beings. And if that's how they saw it and that's how they believe it, then that's probably true. So these animals, people, beings, they need to be respected. I mean, anything that's 8 foot tall and built like that deserves to be respected.
My Bigfoot sighting was in mid-December of 2012. And it was one of the most life-altering events of my life, which is to say a lot. I've had a very exciting life. But at this point in my life, I was got a job as an over-the-road trucker for a big carrier. I'm not going to say which one, but sure wish I had a faster truck. But if I had a faster truck, I don't think I'd have had this sighting. And 2012 was an interesting year. We had tragedy. We had the whole Mayan calendar panic thing that was going on. It was a crazy time, and we lived in crazy times always. But I got in this job, and I had a what's called a mentor, but we've been driving for a while, so he's supposed to teach me. But after you've been driving a while, you switch off, and we were taking a run from Lower Texas all the way up to Detroit, and I was driving. My mentor was in the back asleep, so that he could take over when it was my turn to go to bed. And we were driving through Arkansas, headed toward Little Rock, and it was right outside of Friendship and Hot Springs County and everything like that. And again, this is mid-December, but I mean, it was bright, sunny, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. Everything's still relatively brown and green. There's no snow. There's, you know, it looks more like fall than winter. I mean, there's no inclement weather, no clouds. It's a beautiful morning. And it was about this time that I was driving that truck, and it was governed at a kind of a low speed. I mean, I'm getting passed by everything. And I'm looking up, and, you know, one of the reasons I took the job was the scenery, was to get to see the country. And I'm telling you, going through that part of Arkansas at that time of year is beautiful. And I was looking on both sides of the road, and at that section there is like a highway, then a median, and another highway, and on both sides, both edges, it slopes up into tree lines. And on my side, I'm in the right lane because it's a slow lane. And I look up and I see, and I'm a good ways away, and I see somebody standing at the tree line, and my first thought was that it was a hunter with a ghillie suit, because they were fluffy looking. I mean, that's the best way I can describe it. You know how a ghillie suit looks, you know, with all the little fibers coming off it and everything. But I'm only going about 60 or so. So I mean, as soon as I look at them, I start to slow down a little bit because I'm interested, and we got time. So that was when I realized that that's, as far away as I am, I'm a good ways away. As far as away as I am, that's a really big hunter. And I'm confused because they're wearing a white ghillie suit. And like I said, there's no snow. And that's what made me really start to slow down, because the whole thought of it. I mean, why would you wear a white ghillie suit if there's nothing white around you to blend in with? That's the whole point of it, right? So I'm really slowing down. I've already started to downshift. And that's when I realized that that's not a huge hunter in a ghillie suit. That's fur. And I'm like really slowing down. I'm like leaning over the steering wheel looking, and this thing is standing right at the tree line next to this dead tree. And it's taller than the dead tree. But I mean, like I said, the shoulder raises up into the tree line. So, and I'm sitting in a diesel truck. So I'm pretty much eye level with this thing going all the way in. It looks like it's watching the traffic. I don't know if it's watching the traffic just to watch the traffic, or if it's trying to wait for a break to try to get across into the median and onto the other side, or what it's doing. But when I start to slow down and downshift, the sound of the engine changes. So it looks over at me, and to look over at me, it had to, turn its whole upper body. Because I am a big guy. I have a thick neck, and most people say no neck at all. But this thing, its traps, its shoulder muscles were so tall that it looked like it just like came right out the back of its head in a triangle. So when it turned, its jaw hits its shoulder, and it's kind of like leaning out and looking at me. And as soon as it sees me slowing down, it starts to do this swaying motion with its body and its arms, which kind of, the best way I would describe it is agitated. It seemed agitated. And the closer I'm getting, I'm looking, I'm trying to see its face, and it's rolling its mouth in, kind of like chewing on its lip type, kind of rolling its mouth in. And I'm really slowing down now. I've already decided to pull over, and I'm memorizing every detail of this I can. And, like I said, I've had an exciting life. I've done everything from corrections to, bail enforcement to military to, all kinds of stuff. I've been trained in observation. I've been trained in to remember details, especially on individuals and scenes. And I'm going to describe this thing for you. And if you don't believe me, I get it, but this is it. From where I was, you can't really tell how tall it was, but it was really tall. But the thing is, it was super double wide too. I've got broad shoulders, but this thing was like two of me standing side by side, and a thick chest. Its arms were big, but its arms also were long and lanky, kind of like a basketball player's arms, which are, you look at it like a good forward's arm. They're muscular and they're thick and they're big, but they're also long and lanky, and that's what this thing is like. And when I was looking at its arms, its arms, the fingers almost came down to the knee, but it didn't look out of proportion. That's the weirdest thing. It does not look out of proportion when you look at it, but it actually had kind of a squat leg type thing. There's massive legs, but when you really look at them, especially if you're an artist, you know that there are proportion ranges for human beings. And that's what made me think, first thing, that it wasn't just some idiot in a suit. The next thing that made me think that was the head, because the face, it had a thick brow ridge. The top of the head came to a kind of a point, but it had shaggy hair on its head. And again, totally white. The only thing I've ever seen that remotely looks like this thing is Snowflake the gorilla, which was the only albino gorilla in captivity. But the skin is very pale. The eyes are red and ruddy, and it's got this white fur head to toe. But it's got this thick brow ridge and these deep set red eyes that are huge. They're big eyes. The nose was, kind of short on its face, but it looked like a regular person's nose. It had, hooded nostrils, not like a gorilla's nose. It was wide and flat to its face, but it definitely had regular nostrils, and the space in between the septum and its top lip was way longer, way more space than you would see on anything. And the thing is, to have those lips roll in on a face like that, you would have to have basically a Harry and the Henderson situation where you got 14 puppeteers with pneumatics behind it operating the face. But there's nobody around this thing. But its face is still making these motions that if it was a mask, it shouldn't be able to make. Oh God. The fur in its chest was a good bit thinner. You could see the ripple of the muscles in its chest. It didn't like have a six pack, but you could see this massive freaking Brock Lesnar like chest. I mean, it was wide, powerful built, bowling balls for shoulders. I mean, it was just intimidating. And speaking of intimidating, it was very male. You could see that from where I was. And it was, definitely, if it was a suit, it was, very anatomically correct. But I've already got my flashers on. I'm pulling over and I'm looking at this thing, and its swaying motion is getting more rapid, and it's just kind of going from foot to foot now. And as I pass it, I'm almost stopped. But as I pass it, I'm like looking like directly in this thing's eyes, and it's definitely got intelligence. It's definitely looking back at me, and it had this mark on its mouth that I find weird, because it was either like a line of dirt or a scar, or I don't think it was something it had in its mouth, but it was something on its top lip that was very, very distinctive. And I'm just like not really thinking logically at this point. And as soon as the truck came to a stop, I pulled those brakes, and this is 2012. I didn't have a smartphone. I didn't have anything with a camera. I had a Boost Mobile flip phone that didn't do squat. But the thing is, if I had a movie crew with me, I wouldn't have thought to bring them, because everything is out of my mind except for get it. Not my smartest moment at all. But I popped those brakes. I threw the door open. I don't think I even used the steps on the truck. I think I just jumped right out and was around the front of the truck and running up that embankment. And the only thing going through my mind was, and I get to the berm where that tree was, and it's gone, of course. It's went into the woods, and I ran into the woods after it. Again, this is not my smartest moment ever, because I know what a chimp can do to a person, and I know how much stronger a gorilla is than a chimp. And this thing was bigger than a gorilla, like way bigger than a gorilla. But none of that's in my head. All that's in my head was Bigfoot, get it. Bigfoot, get it, get it, get it, get it. And I'm just chasing this thing. And I didn't chase it very far into the woods, because I ran into a smell. It was, I describe it as a wall of odor. I mean, it was like literally, I don't care if you've ever followed your uncle into the bathroom and walked into a wall of odor. That ain't got nothing on this. That's Chanel number 5. People talk about the smell, and the smell, the best I could describe it, the way I've always described it is, if you can imagine a wet dog fighting with a skunk in a dirty cattle stall while both having diarrhea. I mean, there's a lot of nasal imagery in that little description, but it doubled me over when I ran into that odor. And I mean, I was retching. I didn't throw up, but I think that was because I hadn't had breakfast yet. And it really makes my mouth water thinking about that smell, making me just, it was one of the most memorable things I think, I've ever encountered in my life in that sense. But when I hit that smell, like I said, it doubled me over. It stopped me in my tracks. And I look around and I can see there's no tracks, because this is There's no snow. There's no wet ground. There's leaves and debris all throughout the bottom of these woods. But you can see where it had run through and wallowed through these leaves and everything like that. So if I wanted to, I could have followed it more. But that's when my brains kicked in and I realized what could happen if I followed it more. Whether it wanted to, or maybe it wanted to just be defensive. But if I followed, I don't think it would have been a good idea at all. If it was a person, one, they were on loan from the NBA, and I'm talking about Yao Ming size, bigger than Yao Ming. I've stood next to Paul White, the Big Show from WWE, who was one of the most massive individuals I've ever seen in my life. I mean, this was back when he was over 500 pounds, over 7 feet tall, and he would have looked like a kid next to this thing. It was so big, not only in height, but in girth. And that's a big dude. You got to understand that if, you're saying it's that much bigger than a guy that weighs 500 pounds. I mean, this thing had to be good 800 to 1,000 easy. I mean, I've seen Clydesdale smaller than that thing, but I backtracked up to the berm and I went to that tree that it was standing next to. And I mean, I was ready to book it to the truck if I heard any leaves rustling or anything like it was coming back. But I'm looking around and, and I'm looking at that tree, and again, it was taller than the tree by a good 6 inches. And I'm on my tiptoes. I'm 5'10". I'm on my tiptoes and my fingers can't come anywhere near the top of where this tree was. So, I mean, a good 1.5 feet, 2 feet under where this tree was. So this thing was it was at least over 8 feet tall. And if you are a person, I don't care how big you are, in a suit like that, which is going to be bulky because there's no human beings that are that big. I mean, none. It's just not physically possible for human beings at this point in our evolution or our creation, whatever you want to say. That it would have to be wearing a very bulky suit with a mask that I don't know how it could fit on a person, right? So I'm saying there's probably going to be vision problems where you're going. And if you're wearing that kind of suit and you're outrunning somebody through the woods where there's debris and leaves, you're going to fall. I mean, I don't care if you're one of the guys that can ace Ninja Warrior, you're going to fall because there's things to trip over. You're wearing things over your feet that are basically clown shoes to you. I mean, I don't see a physical way that you could outrun somebody, anything through the woods. I don't see how you could walk through the woods in a suit like that. But this thing was gone. And now everything comes back to the world. I mean, during this whole thing, I don't think I heard anything but my own heartbeat. I mean, and this is when I'm starting to, hear the traffic again and the regular woodland sounds and birds and everything. And I'm like, okay, I went back in the woods and I'm like, time to go. So I got back into the truck and my mentor still snoring in the back. And this is when it comes to the point where you're like, do I tell him? I'm like, I got no proof. He slept through the whole thing. Do I tell him? So, I didn't tell him for a couple weeks. And, he kept asking what was on my mind and what was troubling me and what was going on. But I was like, I don't want to talk about it, and then we were at Denny's at a truck stop and I was like, okay, I'll tell you. And I don't know if he believed me or not, but, he listened to me and he was very polite. But I mean, you hear these stories and you're like, yeah, right. But when it happens, it's like it's almost a religious experience because it's a confirmation of something that is not supposed to be there that you can't normally see. And it's amazing. But so based on that, I didn't tell anybody for a few months after that. And then I told a couple of good friends, and they talked me into to contacting somebody that's kind of in the field, so you could say. So I filed a report with the BFRO, and their investigator got in touch with me, and he said that I didn't live in Arkansas. I lived in Texas, like way west Texas. So I couldn't get over there and show him exactly where, but I told him the general location and to look for that dead tree. And their investigator got back with me a few days later and said that he had found the tree. There were no signs of anything that happened there, but he found the tree. And he didn't tell me if he measured it or not. I told him you should probably measure the tree so you get a good idea of exactly how big it was. And I've never seen the sighting posted on the BFRO, which maybe if they did post it, it'd have that measurement, which would give you a really good idea of how big this thing was. But he said that he'd also had a dozen other reports in that general area over a 2-week period. Exactly what I saw. A over 8-foot tall, massive white Sasquatch. And I've always wanted to, get back in the woods and go squatching, as they say, because once you know it's there, you want to say, hey, come look at this. You want to show people, but it's never been in the cards. And a couple of years after I sent in that report, I actually got contacted again to be on Finding Bigfoot, but I couldn't get over there. But there apparently in that area have been many, many, many sightings of what I saw over more than that one period. But it's something that you'll never forget once it happens to you. But that is my Bigfoot sighting.
My Bigfoot sightings really started back in 2013. I was 12. And I remember going out to get the cows one day from the pasture and seeing this creature. Wasn't really totally sure what it was, but I just went on my way because I knew I had a job to do and the cows needed to be milked. Later that night, I was scrolling through YouTube and I came across the PG film. And after that, I really started believing. And I got more and more signs of this creature, and I learned more and more about what Bigfoot is and what it does, and how to look for evidence, signs of where they've been. As the years went on, I saw more and more tracks in the pasture. I heard howls at night. And then my little brother came up and told me that he saw something and he was scared. And it wasn't really the first time either I had somebody come up and tell me about this. We've had hired men who told me that they saw something and had stuff thrown at them. I would bring friends over and we would go to his pasture and we would look, and at night we would what we called squatching or playing squatching. And that was the one time I do remember really well. We were doing this in our lower dairy pasture, and I had a double sighting. The pasture way it's set up is there's one tree line all the way towards the end of the barn, and then another tree line where they were logging. And I saw one, and I'm like, okay, there's one. That's cool. My friend's never had a sighting before, so she was kind of freaked out. And then I looked at the other end of the pasture, and I saw another one, and that was really my first double sighting. And that was in 2015, 2016. The one towards the tree line where they weren't logging towards the barn was tall. When we recreated it, I think it was 8.5, 9 feet tall. And it was covered in hair. It was dark. And then the other one was a little smaller. I must say that one was 8 feet tall. when we recreated it. And I remember it hanging onto a log. And again, my friend was kind of freaked out because she thought they were people watching us, or a bear. And I remember looking at her and telling her that, well, remember, we were squatching out here, and they could quite possibly be Bigfoot. So again, we went out the next day and we took our hired hand and we recreated these squatches. And she was in shock, and I was because again, it was double sighting, so it was kind of freaky, but pretty awesome at the same time. So in 2017, we built a horse barn on top of our hill. And we would go up and do our horses and mind our own business and go on our merry way. And then it was June. My mom came down from doing horses and she said, Riley, something was throwing stuff at us. And I'm like, okay. So I went up the next day, and the horse barn, you have woods, the horse barn, and then our pasture, our upper horse pasture. And I went up there and I heard some wood knocks, not thinking anything about it. I was just there to do my job. I heard it. And then I go up a little ways, and again, I saw, I guess you call it, Sasquatch looking back at me. And again, it was, oh God, this one was 9 feet tall. I was looking at it, and I turned around because I heard a cow moo. I turned around, and then I looked back, and it was gone. Like, it was nowhere to be found. So, again, fascinated by these creatures, I kept on researching and digging and doing more and more. And me and my friends would go swatching, and we would get knocks and stuff like that, but nothing really evidential for them to believe. But my one friend, Cheyenne, I remember we went out during the day. I don't know why, but we were like, let's just go out. I think she was scared of the dark. And we went down to our lower dry cow pasture, and there's rocks and stuff. And it was about, I want to say 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And we found prints. We're like, okay, this is cool. And then she looks over in the corner where we have a big pile of rocks. And something's getting ready to throw a rock at us. And she tugs on my shirt, and she's like, Riley, come here, come look what I see. And there was a juvenile. But this juvenile had, like, it wasn't dark like the ones I saw before in the other pasture. It had, like, reddish hair. I never seen one with red hair before, so I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. But when we went down there, we figured it was a juvenile. And again, it was a sight to see. I will never forget the first time I saw that one. And we ended up going down to that same pasture the next day. We found where it made a bed down there and everything else. And it wasn't uncommon for us to hear from the people who worked down the stone yard in the mill and stuff that they would hear knocks and howls at night, and then like really early in the morning too. Well, flash forward, we didn't have anything really until about 2020 when I was sitting on the porch, and I looked up on the hayfield. Our house sits on a hill. So I was looking up in our hayfield, and there goes a Sasquatch just walking, arms swaying, big strides. And again, it was that reddish hair. And in my head, I'm thinking this was the juvenile I seen just a couple years before. Quite awesome. What was pretty cool, though, is just this morning I talked to my little brother, and he said that he had a sighting with a reddish-haired Sasquatch this morning while he was chasing cows at 1:30, 2 o'clock. He didn't give me very many details, but I said that's pretty awesome that you saw that. So, December of 2021, we moved into our new house. In January of 2021, we moved into the new house. And at first we weren't really getting anything. It was quiet back there. All we really had was deer, but we noticed something was coming to eat the food that we were giving the deer. We weren't sure what it was, but we would put a 50-pound bag of corn out, and then we would come back 2-3 hours later, and it would be gone. So the stuff that's been happening around the new house that started, I want to say, in April or May. It was right before I graduated, so it would be May. And we put food behind our garage for the deer and everything else. And there was pallets stacked behind the garage from the past owners. And we set up in the woods. We were outside. We were all talking. Me, a bunch of my friends, and my mom. And we heard the pallets being physically moved, and we were all at the house on the porch. And we didn't think any of it because we thought we had a bear, but my mom thought we had a bear. But me and my friends, we all were believers, and we went back and we found prints. And I remember they were big, long strides. From then on out, really, we've had trees knocked down. Every night we hear howls and knocks. My little brother was sitting on the cement wall that sits next to our house. And he comes in, he goes, "Riley, come here. I see something." So I went out with him, and there was it was a Bigfoot, really, and it was standing on the rock. It was, I think when we did it was 8 foot, maybe 9. It was standing on this rock, just watching my little brother sit on the wall. And then, as we're looking at it, we hear off in the distance a wood knock, and we're like, okay, that's cool. And then we look back, and it was gone. After that, again, we hear trees being pushed down. My friends and I, we're all believers. And we couldn't figure out what it was because, my mom said it was a bear. But we all think it was a Bigfoot. Until the one day, I was washing dishes, and where our sink sets is a big window. And we've just put food out because of the deer. We were feeding them and the squirrels, so they would come down closer so we could see them and take pictures. And walking along the tree line, the Sasquatch I saw just 3 to 4 weeks prior. I remember calling my one friend right after I saw it because my phone was charging over by the couch. And I'm like, "Oh my God, Morgan, you will never believe what I just saw. We were right. It's not a bear. It's a Sasquatch. That's what we all thought it was." And we were right. And we both started freaking out and thought it was the coolest thing that we were right. And now we live in peace with them. It's pretty great. So those are my Bigfoot sightings.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown, no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the 5-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.